Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. I used to think growth was a straight line. You know, the kind you see in those motivational posters, arrows pointing upward, graphs climbing steadily, all that rah-rah nonsense. I thought if I just worked harder, pushed longer, and sacrificed more, I'd get there, wherever there was. But life doesn't work like that, does it? Growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You circle back to the same wounds, the same fears, the same doubts. But each time, you see them a little clearer. Each time, you carry them a little differently. Let me tell you about the first time I broke. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no grand revelations. Just a quiet, suffocating moment in the middle of the night. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank screen. The glow of my laptop, the only light in the room. My to-do list was a mile long, and I hadn't crossed off a single thing. Not one. I remember thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just do it? I was so angry at myself. I'd spent years chasing this idea of success. This version of myself that was always just out of reach. And for what? To sit here, paralyzed, feeling like a fraud? I didn't know it then. But that moment was the beginning of something. Not growth. Exactly. More like unraveling. I've been running on fumes for so long. Fueled by this toxic cocktail of ambition and self-loathing. I thought if I could just achieve enough, prove enough, I'd finally feel worthy. But the truth is, no amount of external validation can fill that hole inside you. Trust me, I tried. The mask of motivation. For years, I wore motivation like a mask. I was the person who woke up at 5 a.m., who never missed a workout, who always said yes to every opportunity. I was the one people pointed to and said, look at her. She's so disciplined. She's going places. And I believed it. I thought my worth was tied to my productivity, to my ability to outwork everyone around me. But underneath that mask, I was exhausted and scared and so lonely. I remember the first time someone called me inspiring. It was a coworker, someone I barely knew. They said, I don't know how you do it all. You're such an inspiration. I smiled and said thank you. But inside, I felt like a fraud. If they only knew how much I was struggling, how much I was faking it. But I couldn't let them see that. I couldn't let anyone see that. So I kept going, kept pushing, kept pretending. It wasn't until I hit a wall that I realized how unsustainable it all was. I was so focused on proving myself, on being the best, that I forgot to ask myself why I was doing any of it. What was it all for? Who was I trying to become? And more importantly, who was I losing in the process? The unraveling. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like a thread coming loose from a sweater. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a phase, that I'd snap out of it. But the truth is, I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of hustling. Tired of feeling like I was never enough. The first real crack came during a meeting at work. I was presenting a project I'd spent months on, and halfway through, I froze. My mind went blank. I couldn't remember what I was saying, couldn't remember why I was even there. All I could think was, what if they find out? What if they see how much I'm struggling? I managed to finish the presentation. But afterward, I locked myself in a bathroom stall and cried. Not because of the presentation, but because I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know why I was doing any of it. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself at the altar of success. I needed to figure out what really mattered to me, what I really wanted. But how do you do that when you've spent your whole life chasing someone else's idea of success? The quiet moments. The turning point didn't come in a flash of inspiration or a grand epiphany. It came in the quiet moments. The moments when I stopped running, stopped pushing, and just sat with myself. It was uncomfortable at first. I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like who I'd become. But slowly, I started to untangle the mess inside me. I started to ask myself the hard questions. What do I really want? What makes me feel alive? What am I willing to fight for? It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up. Days when the old habits of hustle and self-doubt crept back in. But I kept going. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving towards something real, something true. The spiral of growth. Growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You circle back to the same wounds, the same fears, the same doubts. But each time, you see them a little clearer. Each time, you carry them a little differently. And each time, you get a little closer to the person you're meant to be. I'm still figuring it out. I still have days when I feel like I'm not enough. Days when the old habits creep back in. But I'm learning to be kinder to myself. I'm learning to let go of the need to prove myself, to outwork everyone around me. I'm learning to trust the process, to trust myself. And you know what? It's messy. It's imperfect. It's painful. But it's also beautiful. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm living. Not just surviving, not just hustling, but really living. And that's worth everything. Part two, the light in the mess. After that night at my desk, something shifted. I didn't wake up the next morning with all the answers. In fact, I woke up feeling heavier than ever. But there was a tiny spark inside me, a quiet voice that whispered, maybe you don't have to do this alone. Maybe you don't have to be perfect. Maybe it's okay to just be. I started small. I let myself sleep in sometimes. I canceled plans when I needed to. I said no to things that drained me, even if it meant disappointing people. And you know what? The world didn't end. No one hated me. In fact, some people respected me more for setting boundaries. But the biggest change was inside me. For the first time, I felt like I was taking up space in my own life. Not as the person I thought I should be, but as the person I actually was. There were still days when the old voices crept in. Days when I felt like I wasn't doing enough, being enough, achieving enough. But instead of pushing through, I started to pause. I'd sit with the feeling, ask it what it needed. Sometimes it was rest. Sometimes it was a good cry. Sometimes it was just a reminder that I was human, and humans are allowed to be imperfect. One day, I found myself in a park, sitting under a tree. I wasn't there to be productive. I wasn't there to check something off a list. I was just there. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from achieving something, but the kind that comes from simply existing. It was in that moment I realized this is what I've been chasing. This is what I've been missing. The moral: growth isn't about perfection. The moral of this story isn't that you should give up on your dreams or stop striving for greatness. It's that growth isn't about perfection. It's not about being the best, the fastest, the smartest. It's about becoming more fully yourself. It's about learning to sit with your imperfections, your fears, your doubts, and saying, "This is me." And that's okay. Toxic motivation tells you that you're not enough as you are. It tells you that you need to be more, do more, achieve more. But true inspiration comes from within. It's the quiet voice that says, "You are enough. You always have been." The journey of becoming a better you isn't about polishing yourself into something shiny and perfect. It's about embracing the mess, the cracks, the imperfections. It's about learning to love yourself not in spite of your flaws, but because of them, because those flaws are what make you human. And being human is the most beautiful thing you can be. So if you're sitting at your desk in the middle of the night, staring at a blank screen and wondering why you can't just do it, take a breath. You're not broken. You're not a fraud. You're just human. And that's enough. Growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. And every time you circle back to where you started, you bring a little more light with you. Keep going. You're doing better than you think. Even after that moment in the park, life didn't magically become easy. Growth isn't a destination. It's a process. And processes are messy. There were still days when I felt like I was back at square one. Days when the weight of expectations, my own and others, felt crushing. But something had shifted. I had shifted. I was no longer willing to sacrifice myself for an idea of success that didn't even feel like mine. I started to notice the small things, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of rain on my window, the warmth of a friend's laugh. These moments didn't fix everything, but they reminded me that life wasn't just about achieving. It was about experiencing. It was about being here in this messy, imperfect, beautiful world. I also started to let people in. I'd spent so long hiding my struggles, afraid that if anyone saw the real me, they'd run the other way. But the opposite happened. When I started to share my fears, my doubts, my failures, people didn't pull away. They leaned in. They said, "Me too." And in those moments, I realized how much of my pain had come from thinking I was alone. I wasn't, and neither are you. The moral: you are not alone. The moral of this part of the story is simple but profound. You are not alone. So much of our pain comes from the belief that we're the only ones struggling, the only ones who feel like we're not enough. But the truth is, everyone is fighting their own battles. Everyone has their own doubts, their own fears, their own cracks. When we let ourselves be seen, really seen, we give others permission to do the same. And in that vulnerability, we find connection. We find community. We find the strength to keep going. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Because we realize that life isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. And being human is a shared experience. So if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling broken, if you're feeling like you're not enough, remember this: you're not alone. There are people who see you, who love you, who are rooting for you. And there are people who need you to show up, just as you are. Because your story, your mess, your imperfections, they matter. They're part of what makes you. You. And the world needs you. Not the polished, perfect version of you. The real you. Keep going. Keep circling the spiral. And remember, you are enough. You always have been. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.